A millionaire asked his maid to marry him just to humiliate her. On the day of the ceremony, the maid interrupted the wedding and said 3 words that left everyone in shock. Lauren was cleaning the bridal suite, as she did every morning. She was a young woman, 25 years old, with black hair always tied in a messy bun and light brown eyes that seemed to carry the melancholy of a hard life. Her hands were already calloused from so much scrubbing floors, polishing furniture, and aligning every detail of that huge mansion where she had worked for 3 months. As she wiped the immaculate furniture, she talked to herself, a habit she had developed to fill the void of loneliness. It's such a lonely life, this one of mine. I clean and clean, but I never have anyone to talk to, she mumbled in a low voice, as if fearing being heard by the silent walls of that oppressive place. The room was, without a doubt, the most beautiful in the house, a space worthy of decor magazines. Everything there seemed to have come out of a dream. The light tones created a light atmosphere, while the expensive furniture shone under the natural light that came in through the window. Large mirrors covered the walls, reflecting the luxury and good taste of every detail. But what really caught the eye was the wedding dress delicately hung near the window. It was a masterpiece, with a shiny fabric that captured and returned the light in a subtle display of glimmers. Lauren, even busy with the cleaning, couldn't stop looking at it. The dress seemed to hypnotize her, and her breathing quickened every time her eyes fell on the embroidered details. Her hands itched to touch that precious fabric, so different from anything she had ever experienced. "Wow, it must be great to wear a dress like that," she murmured, breaking the silence with her soft voice. "Since I was little, I've dreamed of getting married, but I don't think I'll ever get a groom. I just work and work," she continued, allowing herself a sad smile as she stretched her hesitant fingers toward the dress. Finally, she lightly touched the cool, soft fabric, feeling a shiver run through her body. The touch was as soft as a promise of distant happiness. The room was empty and silent, a refuge where Lauren could lose herself in her thoughts. Her boss, Theodore, was a 40-year-old man who rarely appeared during the day, preferring the isolation of his office. Rich and mysterious, Theodore seemed more like a ghost than a real presence in that house. Lauren continued admiring the dress, allowing herself to imagine what it would be like to wear it. "I wonder if anyone will notice if I just try it on. It's been so long since I felt pretty. Just for a minute," she whispered, as if she needed to convince herself that this innocent desire was not a sin. After much thought, Lauren couldn't resist. She looked several times at the door to make sure she was alone. The silence in the hallway was reassuring, but it didn't lessen the weight of her anxiety. She began unbuttoning her maid's uniform, a simple outfit devoid of any charm. Her hands were shaking so much that the buttons seemed to escape her fingers. "My God, if they catch me here, I'll lose my job. But it's just once, real quick," she said, trying to calm herself, as she felt her heart beating faster with each movement. With an almost respectful care, Lauren put on the wedding dress. It was a little big for her, but it still fit perfectly, accentuating her figure in a way she had never experienced before. When she looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes filled with tears. It was the first time she had seen herself dressed as a bride, even if it was just a game. "How I wish my mom were alive to see me like this. She would be so happy," she said softly. Her voice choked with emotion as she wiped away a tear running down her face. As she slowly twirled in front of the mirror, Lauren let her imagination take over. The dress was a spectacle. Small embroidered flowers mingled with glimmers that looked like stars, magically illuminating her figure. For a few minutes she forgot she was just a maid and allowed herself to dream of a different future. "Who knows, maybe one day this will become a reality. We have to have hope," she whispered to her reflection, smiling as she admired herself. Suddenly, something interrupted her daydream. A small folded paper fell from the dress, silently sliding to the floor. Lauren picked up the paper with curiosity, frowning as she unfolded it. Her heart almost stopped as she read the words written in a shaky, clumsy hand. "Help! I need help! He's going to hurt me like he did to the others." A wave of shock ran through her body. What did that mean? Who would have written that note? Before she could process what she had just discovered, a sound in the hallway brought her back to reality. Footsteps. Someone was approaching. The noise echoed in the silence, each step seeming louder and more threatening than the one before. Lauren panicked, She tried to take off the dress, but her clumsy fingers couldn't undo the delicate buttons. Her hands were shaking so much that it was as if the fabric was fighting against her. "Oh my God, what now? I'm going to lose my job. And this note, what does this mean?" she thought, almost suffocating with the intensity of her anxiety. The dress, which had been a dream before, now seemed like a trap. The footsteps were getting closer and closer, and the sound was like a clock counting down the seconds to disaster. Lauren was sweating cold, her heart beating so hard she thought it might explode at any moment. "Please, please, let it be no one. I promise I'll never do anything like this again," she prayed, her voice almost inaudible. She felt her legs go weak and her throat dry as she continued to struggle with the dress. So the inevitable happened. The door opened slowly, revealing Theodore's tall figure, her boss. He stopped at the entrance, and Lauren was paralyzed with fear. Through the mirror, she saw his stern expression and his blue eyes, which seemed to pierce her. Lauren tried to speak, but the words came out trembling and almost inaudible. I'm sorry, Mr. Theodore, I was just..." The silence was deafening. Theodore said nothing, just watched her, his presence dominating the space like an oppressive shadow. Lauren felt as if the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. Finally, he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was something cold, unsettling that sent a shiver down Lauren's spine. He entered the room, closing the door with a calculated movement, as if he were sealing her fate. "You look even prettier than her in that dress," he said, his voice calm but loaded with something Lauren couldn't decipher. Lauren clutched the note tightly, hiding it in the folds of the dress. Her heart seemed like a drum, beating fast and hard against her chest. Theodore slowly walked towards her, each step echoing like thunder in the oppressive silence. He stopped beside her, looking directly into her eyes through the mirror. "I think fate has brought us here," he said, still with that smile that didn't reach his eyes. The room became even more silent. Lauren couldn't move. It seemed her feet were glued to the floor. Through the mirror, she saw Theodore slowly approaching, like a cat surrounding a little bird. "You know, Lauren, sometimes things happen exactly the way they need to happen," he said, getting closer and closer. Theodore kept looking at Lauren with that strange smile, but instead of arguing with her, he spoke with a surprisingly calm, almost hypnotic voice. "Don't be afraid. I won't fire you. In fact, I think it's good that I found you like this. You have a bridal air that matches this house," he said, but his intonation carried an enigmatic tone, and each word seemed chosen to leave Lauren even more confused. She didn't know what to say. Her hands clutched the hidden note in the fabric of the dress, while her mind desperately tried to understand why her boss was being so kind after catching her doing something that could undoubtedly cost her job. "Theodore, dear, I've arrived for the dress fitting," a woman's voice shouted from downstairs, cutting through the oppressive silence of the room. It was Olivia, Theodore's pregnant bride, a young woman who, like Lauren, had been an employee of the house, but who had become involved with her boss months ago and was now expecting a child from him. Theodore turned towards the door, his facial expression briefly changing to something more practical and cold. "I'll be right down, darling. Wait for me in the living room," he replied in an almost mechanical tone. Then he turned his gaze back to Lauren and said with an enigmatic smile, "You'd better change. You can leave the dress where it was. No one will know about our little secret." As soon as Theodore left the room, closing the door behind him, Lauren felt the weight of tension collapse on her shoulders. She began hastily removing the dress, her hands still trembling with nervousness. The note in her pocket seemed to burn against her skin, a constant reminder that something very wrong was happening in that house. Why wasn't he angry? And this note? Is Olivia in danger? She thought, trying to keep her mind clear as she put her uniform back on. With every movement, she cast furtive glances at the door, fearing that Theodore might return at any moment. Downstairs, Olivia was sitting on the living room sofa, caressing her 8-month belly with slow, delicate movements. She was a young and beautiful woman, with long brown hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and green eyes that used to shine, but now seemed weighed down with fatigue. Minutes later, Theodore entered the living room where his bride awaited him, carrying a silver tray with a teapot and 2 cups. He seemed calm, almost jovial, as he placed the tray on the coffee table. "Before the dress fitting, I prepared a special tea for you and our baby," he said, his voice laced with a gentle but controlled tone. Lauren descended the stairs slowly, now in her maid's uniform, her feet barely touching the steps as she tried not to make a sound. She stopped on the last step, hidden by the shadow of the railing from where she could see and hear everything without being noticed. Theodore poured the tea with calculated gestures, his hands steady as he poured the steaming liquid into Olivia's cup. "It's an old recipe from my family," he said as he pushed the cup towards her. "It will do wonders for the baby. Drink it while it's hot, dear." The scene seemed perfect at first glance, but there was something in his gestures, in his intonation, that made Lauren's stomach churn. The words of the note echoed in her mind. "Help! I need help! He will hurt me like he did to the others." Olivia carefully picked up the cup, gently blowing on the steam. The scent made her frown, and she hesitated before drinking. "What a strange smell. Are you sure it won't make me sick?" she asked, subtle suspicion in her voice. Theodore, who had until then maintained an almost paternal smile, ran his hand through her hair in a gesture that seemed affectionate, but which to Lauren had something forced about it. "Of course not, my love. I would never do anything to hurt you or our child, trust me," he replied, his voice imbued with sweetness, but with an almost imperceptible stiffness. Olivia brought the cup to her lips and began to drink, while Lauren, hidden, watched everything with a heavy heart. Each sip Olivia took seemed like a blow to Lauren, who wanted to run and stop her, but didn't know how. Suddenly the phone rang, the loud sound cutting through the tension in the air. Olivia jumped, nearly dropping the cup. Theodore took the phone from his pocket, and his expression changed instantly when he saw who was calling. "I need to take this in the office. Finish your tea, I'll be right back," he said, hurrying up the stairs. Lauren took the opportunity to come out of her hiding place and entered the room. Olivia had already drunk almost all the tea when Lauren approached. "Are you okay?" Lauren asked, noticing that Olivia was beginning to show signs of discomfort. Her face was flushed, and beads of sweat were forming on her forehead. Olivia blinked several times as if trying to keep her eyes open. "I'm feeling strange." "The room is spinning," she replied, her voice trembling. Lauren sat down next to Olivia, her heart pounding with worry. "There's something wrong with this tea," Olivia murmured, her words slurred as if each syllable demanded an enormous effort. She tried to stand up, but her legs seemed to disobey. "Help me. I don't feel well," she pleaded, gripping Lauren's arm tightly. The note in Lauren's pocket seemed to weigh more every second, like an invisible burden. Olivia's eyes began to close and she mumbled something almost inaudible. "The baby. I need to protect my baby." Lauren held her hands, which were as cold as ice. "Olivia, stay awake. Please try to stay awake." Lauren begged, her voice desperate as she looked towards the stairs, fearing that Theodore might return at any moment. From upstairs, Theodore's voice could still be heard as he spoke on the phone, his conversation muffled, but clearly nearing its end. Olivia clutched her belly, groaning softly. "Something's wrong. Very wrong." Her words were almost a whisper, and her head began to nod forward. Lauren tried to keep her awake, gently tapping her cheeks. "Please, Olivia, listen to me. Stay with me, just a little longer." Lauren's voice was choked with tears. Olivia's breathing became slower and slower, and her eyes finally closed. "Help me. Don't leave me alone," she tried to say, but the words caught in her throat. Her limp body slid down on the couch, falling into Lauren's arms. "My God, did he put something in that tea?" Lauren thought, her heart beating so fast it seemed to echo in her ears. Theodore's voice upstairs grew closer, indicating he was finishing the call. Lauren tried to wake Olivia, tapping her face. "Wake up, please, wake up. I can't leave you alone with him. I have to help you. Come with me, please." But Olivia didn't move, breathing so slowly it was barely perceptible. Olivia's last thought before passing out was a silent plea. "My baby. Help my baby." And then her body went completely limp in Lauren's arms, who was now alone with an unconscious pregnant woman and a dangerous man about to come downstairs. With her heart pounding, Lauren tried to wake Olivia, who was unconscious in her arms. The weight of the situation made her mind spin, but she knew she couldn't give in to despair. She gently tapped the pregnant woman's face and called her name softly, afraid that Theodore would hear any sound coming from the room. Olivia didn't respond. Her breathing was so weak that it was barely noticeable when her chest rose and fell. "Olivia, please wake up. We need to get out of here before he comes back. Think of your baby. You need to fight, Lauren whispered, her voice broken by urgency. Theodore's steps upstairs grew closer to the stairs. The sound of the wooden floor creaking beneath his feet echoed through the house, each step seeming like a drum beating directly on Lauren's heart. She looked around frantically, searching for any exit, any hiding place where she could take Olivia. But the environment seemed like a conspiracy. There was nowhere to hide. If he was capable of doing this to you, a pregnant woman, he will do something worse to me too. I need to get you out of here. I can't let this happen to a woman carrying a baby in her womb, she murmured, feeling the weight of the note in her pocket. Those words continued to hammer in her mind, like a grim warning. Gathering all the strength she could, Lauren tried to lift Olivia from the couch. Every muscle in her body trembled with the effort. It was much harder than she imagined. Olivia was completely limp, and her pregnant belly made everything even more complicated. Lauren felt a twinge of frustration mixed with fear. "Why are you so heavy? Help me, Olivia. Make an effort," she pleaded, even though she knew Olivia was unconscious. She pulled the unconscious woman's arms while trying to ignore Theodore's approaching steps. Finally, with an almost superhuman effort, she managed to get Olivia to her feet, supporting all of her weight on her shoulders. Every movement seemed like a battle, every step a small victory against the fear that gripped her chest. She began to drag her towards the nearest hallway, her knees faltering under the pregnant woman's weight. Sweat poured down her face, and her hands were slippery, making the task even more difficult. Just a little more. Just a little more. We need to get to the hallway before he comes downstairs, she thought, repeating it to herself like a mantra. But Olivia was too heavy. Lauren could feel her arms throbbing, and her back protested with every step. It was becoming harder to move fast enough, and the feeling of helplessness was starting to suffocate her. "Oh God, please help me. I can't fail now, not when a woman and a baby depend on me," she muttered, her words mingling with the wheezing sound of her breath. When she heard Theodore's footsteps reaching the top of the stairs, her heart stopped for an instant. "Oh God, what now? I won't be able to carry her in time," she thought, feeling panic taking over. The seconds seemed to drag as Lauren struggled to move Olivia. The woman's body slipped from her arms, and she had to stop every few steps to readjust her grip. Theodore's shoes thudded against the stair steps, a methodical and relentless sound that seemed to hammer inside Lauren's head. "Please, God, give me strength. I can't let him harm her and the baby," she prayed silently, her words laden with despair. Tears threatened to spill, but she knew she couldn't lose control. Then Theodore's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. "You shouldn't have gotten involved in my affairs, Maid." Lauren froze. He was standing on the last step, looking at her with a cold smile that made her skin crawl. His blue eyes, usually expressionless, now gleamed with a frightening intensity. Those words echoed in Lauren's mind, and she felt a chill run down her spine. Fear shot through her body like a bolt of lightning, paralyzing her for an instant that seemed to last an eternity. In a matter of seconds, Lauren made a desperate decision. As gently as she could, she laid Olivia down on the floor, her movements swift and trembling. Before Theodore could reach them, Lauren rose and ran down the darkest hallway of the house. "Follow me, you monster! Come after me and leave her alone!" she shouted, her voice brimming with a courage she didn't know she had. Each word was a challenge to Theodore, an invitation to pursue her and, thus, keep Olivia out of harm's way. Her plan worked. She could hear Theodore's heavy footsteps chasing after her, his breathing growing louder and more labored with every second. "It's no use running, Lauren. You have nowhere to go," he yelled, his voice echoing through the hallways like thunder. Lauren felt fear pulsing through every fiber of her being, but fear also fueled her determination. She ran faster and faster, dodging furniture and turning down hallways she didn't even know existed, as Theodore had forbidden her from cleaning many areas in the East Wing. The mansion, once vast, now seemed like an endless labyrinth. Dark corridors stretched in every direction, each one more menacing than the last. The shadows on the walls seemed to come alive, dancing to the frantic rhythm of her breathing. "I need to find a way out. I need to get help. Olivia and the baby depend on me," she thought, her eyes desperately searching for a window or a door that could lead her out of this nightmare. As she ran, the hallways grew darker and dustier, as if that part of the house hadn't been used in many years. The smell of mold and old wood filled the air, making every breath an effort. The air seemed heavier, and Lauren felt as if the whole place conspired to suffocate her. The walls seemed to close in, narrowing the path ahead. "Oh God, help me find a way out. I can't fail now. I have to keep him distracted, away from the pregnant woman downstairs," she pleaded in thought, struggling against exhaustion. Theodore's voice still echoed behind her, but it sounded more distant now. Still, Lauren dared not slow her pace. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but she kept running, driven by the instinct to survive. She entered another hallway, this one even darker than the others. The shadows were thicker, and the floor seemed uneven beneath her feet. "I can't stop, I can't let him catch me. I need to save Olivia," she repeated to herself as if it could keep her strength going. That's when something caught her attention. At the end of the hallway there was a faint glow, a point of light that seemed promising. Lauren felt a thread of hope bloom in her chest and ran toward it, believing she had found an exit. But as she drew closer, hope gave way to horror. It wasn't a window or a door, it was another wedding dress hanging on the wall. But this dress was different from the one she had tried on earlier. The dim light filtering through a small window above illuminated dark stains on the white fabric. Stains that Lauren immediately recognized as dried blood. The dress swayed gently, as if moved by an invisible breeze, its stains telling a gruesome story that made Lauren clap her hands over her mouth to stifle a scream. Lauren ran into a room and was shocked for a moment. There, dozens of stained dresses hung, as she quietly closed the door behind her, as if holding her own breath along with that gloomy room. The space was large and dark, illuminated only by a faint light filtering through dust-covered windows. Wedding dresses hung on antique racks dominated the place, all with dark stains of dried blood that silently narrated a tale of terror. The air was heavy, with a smell of mold and dust that made Lauren's nose itch, but she dared not even breathe deeply, afraid of making any sound that could reveal her location. Her hands were still trembling as she held the doorknob. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, Lauren let her thoughts run free. How many women did he hurt? What happened here? Are Olivia and the baby in danger? My God, how many brides have suffered here? She thought, feeling a chill run down her spine. Her mind went back to the crumpled note in her pocket, its words haunting her like an omen. She looked around, searching for anywhere she could hide. Finally, she chose a rack full of dresses to take shelter behind. The texture of the stained fabric brushed against her skin, and she held her breath, hoping not to be found. On the back wall of the room there was a locked door with a rusty padlock. Even from a distance, it was impossible not to notice how out of place that door seemed compared to the rest of the room. Lauren crouched behind a rack, trying to control the loud sound of her own breathing. Her heart was pounding so hard that she was sure Theodore could hear it as he approached. Her eyes were fixed on the locked door, but something on the floor just below the rack caught her attention. Among the bars of white and stained fabric, something black stood out. A thick hardcover aged book. With trembling fingers, Lauren picked up the book, feeling its weight as if it carried the weight of the answers she so desperately needed. Will this have the answers I need? I need to find out what happened here, she murmured to herself, hesitant to open that object that seemed to contain all the dark secrets of that house. Upon opening it, she realized it was an album. Each page seemed to scream a story of pain and tragedy. The photos inside the album showed women dressed as brides, their expressions of happiness frozen in time, eternalized by a camera, insensitive to the horror that would come later. Lauren began to flip through the pages with trembling fingers, gradually recognizing the stained dresses that hung around her. Each photo showed a different woman, all smiling at the camera, alongside Theodore. They all worked here. They were employees like me and Olivia, she whispered, feeling a lump in her throat as she saw the folded uniforms placed next to the photos. The following pages brought an even more terrible revelation. Each woman had 3 photos, one wearing the maid's uniform, another with the wedding dress, and a last one. Lauren couldn't go on. She slammed the album shut, as if that could erase the images she had just seen. Her hands were shaking so much that she almost dropped the book on the floor. He did this to them, and now he's going to do the same to Olivia, she thought, panic tightening her chest as she remembered her unconscious friend downstairs. She clutched the album to herself, as if she needed something to hold on to. I have to do something for that woman. I have to help her, she thought. However, a low, muffled sound interrupted her thoughts. It was a faint moan, almost imperceptible, coming from behind the locked door. Lauren froze, her eyes fixed on the rusty lock as she tried to listen better. The sound came again, clearer this time, as if someone was trying to call for help but with little strength. Without making noise, she crawled to the door, the album still in her hands. She pressed her ear against the cold wood, her heart beating faster with every second. "Is someone there? Please answer me," she whispered, as low as she could, her voice barely exceeding the silence of the room. The moan became a little louder, and Lauren was certain that someone was trapped inside. The idea that another person might be alive in that house, sharing the same terror as her, brought a mix of hope and despair. She tried to peek through the keyhole, but the darkness on the other side made it impossible to see anything. Her hands began to feel the door, searching for any crack or weak spot. "Hang in there, I'll try to help you," she murmured, as if her words could pass through the wood and reach the person on the other side. She began to look for something in the room that she could use to break the lock. She looked around, her eyes scanning every dark corner of the room, but all she saw were the dresses hanging like silent witnesses. Her search was interrupted by a chilling voice behind her, which made her blood freeze. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Lauren turned slowly, her entire body paralyzed by fear. Theodore was standing at the room's door, blocking the only exit. His eyes shone in the dimness, and a calm smile curved his lips. But that smile carried no real emotion, only coldness. Lauren tried to find her voice, but all she managed to say came out in a trembling whisper. "Why did you do this to them? What do you want?" Theodore entered the room slowly, like a predator in no rush to attack his prey. The door closed behind him with a click that sounded like a sentence. The little light that came through the cracks of the dirty windows cast strange shadows on his face, accentuating his harsh features. "They abandoned me. All of them. They said they loved me, agreed to marry me, and then tried to run away." He spoke, his voice calm, but with an intensity that made Lauren shrink. She took a step back, but her back soon met the locked door. There was nowhere to run. "And Olivia?" "She's pregnant with your child," she shouted, trying to buy time while thinking of a way to escape. Theodore laughed, but the sound had no joy. It was dry, almost mechanical, and made Lauren shudder. "Olivia is like the others. She would have abandoned me as soon as the baby was born. But you're different." The moans behind the door grew louder, as if the person trapped there wanted to warn Lauren of the danger. Theodore kept approaching, each of his steps echoing on the wooden floor, his eyes fixed on her. "You looked so beautiful in that dress this morning, so innocent, so pure. Exactly what I was looking for." "You're insane!" Lauren shouted, trying to run towards the door, but Theodore was quicker. His big, strong hands grabbed her arms, holding her with such force that Lauren was certain they would leave marks. "No, darling. I just want a wife who will stay with me forever," he said, his voice low but cutting, as he brought his face close to hers. With a swift motion, Theodore turned the key that Lauren hadn't noticed was in the lock behind her. The door opened with a frightening creak, revealing only darkness. "Welcome to your new home, my love," he whispered in her ear. Lauren tried to break free, but it was too late. Theodore pushed her with such force that she fell into the dark, locked room. The last thing she saw before the door closed was his smile, illuminated by the faint light from the hallway. The dull thud of the closing door echoed through the dark room like a final sentence. Lauren fell to the cold floor, her knees hitting the stone floor hard. In the dark, she could hear a faint breathing that wasn't her own. She wasn't alone in that room, and that scared her more than anything. Lauren felt her way in the dark, her cold hands finding only damp walls coated with a layer of grime that seemed to have never been touched. The strong smell of mold permeated the air, making each breath an uncomfortable effort that made her nose burn and eyes water. In the oppressive silence, drops of water dripped rhythmically somewhere in the distance, heightening the sense of desolation. As she tried to orient herself, her ears caught the breathing she had heard before. It was closer now, mingled with the unsettling sound of chains dragging across the stone floor. Lauren swallowed hard and tried to calm her racing heart. "Is someone there?" she asked, her voice laden with an almost palpable nervousness. "Please talk to me, I won't hurt you." A pause followed, long enough for Lauren to think she might be alone. But then a faint sound emerged from the darkness, almost inaudible. "Here, I'm here." The voice was a woman's, hoarse and broken, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. A chill ran through Lauren's body, but she mustered her courage and began crawling toward the sound. Her outstretched hands felt ahead, afraid of bumping into something or someone along the way. When her fingers finally touched something warm and rough, she almost screamed in fright, instinctively recoiling. It was a hand. "My name is Rebecca," said the voice, now clearer. "It's been so long since I've seen anyone but him." As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, Lauren began to make out the outline of a woman sitting on the floor. Her body seemed frail, her long tangled hair falling in disorderly strands around her pale face. Lauren swallowed hard, the sight of the woman filling her with a mixture of pity and horror. "How long have you been here?" she asked, carefully holding the woman's icy hand. Rebecca let out a bitter laugh, devoid of any trace of joy. "I lost count after the first year. Theodore locked me up here when I tried to leave our marriage. I'm alone here. Only he comes to feed me, but I don't hear anyone else in the house besides him." Those words hung in the air like a sentence. Lauren's stomach churned as Rebecca, in a low, trembling voice, began to recount her story. She was Theodore's first wife, the only one he actually married. At first he seemed so charming, so normal, Rebecca began, her voice laden with deep sadness. "But after I discovered his plans, I tried to leave. That's when he brought me here. He said I would never leave him." With each word, Lauren felt the gravity of the situation intensify, as if she were being drawn into an endless abyss. "All the maids like you," Rebecca continued, looking through the darkness at Lauren's maid uniform, gripping her hand with a surprising strength for someone so frail. "He seduces them, promises marriage, and then makes them disappear." Lauren tried to process these revelations as fear crept up her spine. "But why? Why does he do this?" she asked, almost voiceless. Rebecca leaned closer. "Money. Where do you think all this wealth comes from if he doesn't work?" she replied bitterly. "He takes out life insurance policies in their names before the supposed marriage. When they disappear, he gets the money. He's done it with 5 women already." At the mention of Olivia's name, Lauren felt her heart constrict as if it were being crushed. "I'm not his bride, I'm the house cleaner. The bride, she's pregnant. I need to save her. He gave her a strange tea to drink and she passed out." She spoke rapidly, her words charged with urgency. Rebecca gripped her hand tightly, as if trying to pass some kind of energy to her. "The same tea he gave all the others," she explained. "It was like that with all the others." As Rebecca spoke, Lauren continued feeling along the damp walls around her, searching for anything she could use to escape. Her fingers stumbled upon something metallic near the floor. "Look! There's a hole here," she whispered, her voice filled with renewed hope. "Can we get this grate off?" Rebecca, who seemed to regain some of her former strength upon seeing Lauren's efforts, dragged herself to where she was, her chains scraping across the stone floor. "This grate has been loose for months, but I could never reach it on my own. I'm too weak," she explained, pointing to the chain on her ankle that prevented her from moving more than a few meters. "But you can get through it." Lauren began pulling at the rusted grate with trembling hands, putting all her strength into each movement. The metal groaned in protest against the tugs, but finally gave way with a snap that sounded too loud in the silence. A dark hole appeared before her, large enough for a slim person to pass through. "Come with me," said Lauren, already looking for something to try to break Rebecca's chain. But the woman shook her head, her eyes shining with a mixture of sadness and determination. "There's no time, I'm too weak, and the new bride needs help now," she said, gently pushing Lauren toward the hole. "Go. Save her before it's too late." Lauren hesitated, but Rebecca's insistent gaze made her obey. "Promise you'll come back to help me after she's safe," Rebecca pleaded, her voice full of a vulnerability Lauren couldn't ignore. "I promise. I'll get you and Olivia out of here, even if it's the last thing I do. By the way, my name is Lauren and I will return," Lauren replied, squeezing Rebecca's hand one last time before entering the duct. The space was narrow and claustrophobic, the metal walls coated in dust and cobwebs. Lauren could barely move, using her elbows and knees to propel herself forward. The air was heavy, and dust entered her nose and mouth, forcing her to hold back a cough that could give away her position. "I have to get to Olivia," she thought, repeating those words like a mantra to keep her mind focused. I can't let him do to her what he did to the others. After what seemed an eternity crawling in the dark, Lauren began to notice a faint light ahead. The duct widened near the exit, and muffled sounds from the house started to reach her. She was almost at the laundry room grate when a shrill scream cut through the mansion's silence, echoing down the corridors like a siren of terror. Lauren stopped, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. The scream came again, louder this time. It was Olivia's voice, and she was calling for help. Rebecca, still in the dark room, heard it too, and her body tensed. The two women, separated by distance but united by fear, knew that time was running out. "Help! Somebody help me!" Olivia's voice echoed through the mansion's corridors, each word laced with desperation. Lauren felt her blood run cold as she realized she had to act quickly, or she would lose her chance to save her. Lauren continued crawling through the air duct, every movement a painful effort. The metal surfaces were cold, scraping her already bruised hands and knees. The accumulated dust made the air heavy, entering her nose and mouth, making her fight the urge to cough. Each muffled scream from Olivia that pierced the duct felt like a knife through her heart. "Hang in there." "I'm coming," she whispered to herself, seeking courage amidst the despair. "I won't let him do to you what he did to the others." The duct began to rise sharply toward the second floor, and Lauren realized the path would become even more difficult. The already narrow spaces now required her to use all her strength to climb, pushing with her feet and pulling with her arms. Her muscles burned, begging for rest, but she knew she couldn't stop. Beads of sweat trickled down her face, mingling with the accumulated grime. She paused for a moment to listen, her ears straining for the sound of Olivia's cries, which seemed to be coming from somewhere to the right. "Where did he take you? This house is a maze," Lauren thought, trying to control her breathing as she turned at a duct intersection. Time seemed to drag on. Every second inside that cramped space turned into an eternity. Lauren's hands ached with each pull, but she had no choice. The sound of Olivia's cries grew clearer as she advanced. After a few more minutes that felt like hours, Lauren spotted an air vent grate ahead. Olivia's voice was coming from there, closer than ever. Lauren crawled up to the grate and peeked through the slits. The room beyond the grate was small and dim, with antique furniture that seemed forgotten by time. Olivia was lying on a bed, her body thrashing as she called for help. Her voice was broken, full of despair, and her words made Lauren clench her fists in anger. "My baby Don't let him hurt my baby," Olivia repeated, her voice failing between sobs. Lauren wasted no time. She mustered all the strength she could and kicked the grate with her foot. The metal groaned but held. She kicked again, ignoring the pain shooting up her leg. 1, 2, 3 times, until the rusty screws gave way and the grate fell with a metallic clang that echoed through the room. Lauren slid into the dark space, her heart racing. "It's okay, Olivia, it's me, Lauren," she whispered, running to her friend's side. "I'm going to get you out of here." Olivia was bound to the bed with strips of fabric tightly wrapped around her wrists and ankles. Her pale face glistened with sweat, and her eyes could barely focus on Lauren. He said if I try to escape, I won't be able to raise his child, that he'll give it to someone else," Olivia said in a panic. Lauren felt rage simmering inside her as she finished untying the ropes. "I won't let that happen," she assured, helping Olivia sit up. "We're getting out of here now." The bedroom door was locked, but Lauren found a thin piece of iron lying on the floor and picked it up, then began fiddling with the lock. Her hands were sweaty, but she forced her fingers to work quickly. Olivia, sitting on the edge of the bed, held her stomach while crying softly. "The baby's moving a lot," she whispered, her voice laden with concern. "I think he's scared too." Lauren didn't take her eyes off the lock, but replied firmly, "It'll be okay, you'll see, I just need to open this. I won't leave you alone. You'll be safe." A soft click interrupted her speech. The lock gave way, and the door was open. Lauren put Olivia's arm over her shoulders, helping her up. "We'll have to go slowly," she said, adjusting her friend's weight in her arms. "Lean on me and try to walk as quietly as you can." Olivia nodded, but her legs were shaking so much that they seemed like they might give way at any moment. The first steps were the hardest. Olivia stumbled with every move, and Lauren had to practically carry her. The hallway was plunged into darkness, lit only by a few faint lights from the windows. The silence was oppressive. Theodore could be anywhere. and the thought made Lauren break out in a cold sweat. "Where are we going?" Olivia asked, her voice little more than a whisper. "There's a back door near the laundry room. I know the way," Lauren replied, trying to sound more confident than she really was. Every step was a battle. Olivia stopped every few meters, taking deep breaths and holding her stomach. The tea was still circulating through her veins, leaving her weak and disoriented. "I don't know if I can make it," she murmured, after nearly falling for the third time. Lauren held Olivia tighter, ignoring the pain in her own arms. "You can," she said, her voice full of determination. "Think about your baby, Olivia. We need to get out of here." Going down the stairs was the scariest part. Each step seemed like a challenge, every sound amplified in the silence. Olivia gripped the railing so tightly her knuckles were white, while Lauren supported her on the other side. "Just a few more steps," Lauren encouraged. "You're doing so well. We're almost there." They finally reached the first floor. Olivia was panting, sweat streaming down her face, and her irregular breathing worried Lauren. "I need to rest for a bit," Olivia pleaded, leaning against the wall. "Just for a minute." Lauren shook her head, knowing they couldn't afford to stop. "You can rest later, I promise. Now we have to keep going." A few meters from the laundry room door, Olivia stumbled again. This time she bumped into an old side table, knocking over a vase that shattered on the floor. The sound of breaking glass was like a gunshot in the silence, echoing through the hallways. Lauren felt her heart stop for a second. Olivia began to cry, clutching her stomach even tighter. And then the worst happened. A shrill, piercing sound tore through the air, coming from everywhere at once. Alarms! The entire house seemed to awaken from a somber sleep as an alarm system was activated. The deafening noise made the walls vibrate, and red lights began flashing, turning the hallways into a pulsating nightmare. Olivia covered her ears, frightened, as tears rolled down her face. "He's going to find us! He's coming!" she shouted, panic in her voice. The sound of slamming doors echoed through the house, and heavy footsteps quickly descended the stairs. A booming voice cut through the alarm noise. "You're not going anywhere." It was Theodore. Lauren and Olivia kept walking slowly, until they managed to leave the house through the laundry room gate, plunging into the dense darkness of the garden. The night was moonless, and the blackness made it impossible to see more than a few steps ahead. The sound of the alarms reverberated inside the mansion, and the flashing red lights in the windows cast long, frightening shadows on the tall grass. Olivia stumbled with every step, her heavy, ragged breathing dominating the silence outside. "I can't go any further," she whispered, her hand clutching her stomach. "The baby's moving a lot. It hurts." Lauren held the pregnant woman firmly, putting an arm around her waist. "I know it's hard, Olivia, but you have to hold on. We can't stop now. He'll catch us." The garden was a labyrinth of overgrown shrubs and ancient trees, their branches seeming like arms that moved with the wind. Lauren guided Olivia through the most hidden paths she knew, her firm hands on her friend's shoulders to keep her upright. The damp, dewy ground made each step a challenge, their feet slipping on the grass. "Lean on me," Lauren said, struggling to keep her balance. Olivia just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I'm trying, but it feels like my legs won't respond," she muttered, her voice a thread. The first bark cut through the air, a low, threatening sound that seemed to multiply in the night. Theodore's 3 German shepherds, kept locked up during the day, were now loose and sniffing out the women's trail. Olivia stopped suddenly, gripping Lauren's arm tightly. "The dogs!" she whispered, her voice laden with terror. "He's let the dogs out!" Lauren glanced over her shoulder, hearing the growing sound of barking. "They're close. Olivia, we need to keep moving," she said, pulling her friend harder. "We have no choice." More sounds came from the mansion. Doors slamming forcefully, heavy footsteps echoing on the porch. Theodore's voice rang out in the night like thunder, laden with anger and contempt. "You can run, but you have nowhere to go. This property is mine, and I know every inch of it." Olivia started shaking, her legs weakening even more. "I don't want to go back there. I need my baby. I can't raise my child with this man," she sobbed, clutching her belly. Lauren swallowed the fear rising in her throat and whispered back, "That's not going to happen, trust me." The barking grew louder and closer, and Lauren knew time was running out. Theodore's footsteps descended the porch steps, and she felt the weight of the decision she needed to make. The garden offered 2 paths. The main gate distant and exposed, and the back of the property where a lower fence offered a chance to escape. Lauren gripped Olivia's arms and said urgently, "Olivia, listen, we're going to have to split up." The pregnant woman's eyes widened in the dark, shaking her head in denial. I can't. Please, don't leave me alone," Olivia pleaded, clutching Lauren's hand tightly. "For you can, Olivia," Lauren insisted, holding her friend's face between her hands. "If we stay together, he'll catch us. You have to go through the back, follow the fence and look for a house after 2 blocks. Get help. I'll distract him." Olivia let out a quiet sob, tears streaming as she shook her head in despair. "Please don't do this, he'll hurt you." Lauren squeezed her shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. "Promise me you'll run as fast as you can. Don't look back. Your baby needs you." The barking was practically on top of them. Lauren couldn't wait any longer. "When I start running, you go the other way. Don't stop until you're safe," she said firmly, hugging Olivia one last time. "Thank you for everything." "Please don't die," Olivia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not going to die. I'll fight for both of us," Lauren replied, before gently pushing her in the indicated direction. Lauren waited until she saw the dogs approaching through the tall grass, their dark silhouettes advancing like living shadows. She leapt out from behind the bush, yelling as loud as she could, "Here, Theodore! I'm here! Come and get me!" Theodore's voice sounded right behind. "You'll regret this, Lauren," he said. But the maid ran towards the main gate, making as much noise as possible. "I'll only regret it if you catch me, but I don't think you can you?" she shouted, her words echoing in the darkness. So Lauren ran, making a loud noise to alert where she was, giving Olivia a chance to escape. However, the pregnant woman moved slowly towards the back of the property. Her steps were clumsy, the effect of the tea still leaving her dizzy and weak. "Please, my son, hold on a little longer," she whispered, one hand on her belly, while the other leaned on trees and bushes. Every step was a battle, but Olivia knew she had to keep going. "Mommy's going to get us out of here, just a little more," she repeated to herself. Lauren ran with all the strength she had, dodging roots and rocks that emerged in her path. The dog's barking was getting closer and closer, and she knew she couldn't keep up that pace for long. "Come on, Lauren, you can do this. Just a little more. This is for Olivia and the baby," she thought, as the sound of Theodore's footsteps grew louder behind her. Lauren glanced back quickly and saw the light of a swinging lantern between the bushes. With each step, Lauren felt her tired legs, but the thought of Olivia and the baby gave her strength to continue. "You think you can fool me? I know every nook and cranny of this place," Theodore roared, his voice getting closer. Lauren found an old fountain and threw a rock into the water, the loud sound echoing through the garden. Maybe that will slow him down, she thought, before continuing to run. As Lauren veered into the densest part of the garden, Olivia reached the low fence at the back of the property. With difficulty, she began to climb, her trembling hands clutching the cold metal. "Almost there. Just a little more," she said to herself, her words coming out in a thin voice. The sound of snapping branches behind her made Olivia pause for a moment, her heart racing. "Please, let it just be the wind," she thought, trying not to look back. Then it happened. A shrill, desperate scream cut through the night, echoing across the entire garden. Olivia's voice was filled with terror, and Lauren stopped instantly, her heart pounding. "Olivia!" she shouted, her body frozen with fear. The silence that followed was even more terrifying, broken only by the echo of that dreadful scream. Time seemed to stop, and even the dog's barking ceased for a moment. Deep down, Lauren knew that something terrible had happened. "No, it can't be," she thought, before turning and running back towards the sound, determined to save Olivia no matter the cost. Olivia's scream made Lauren freeze in her tracks, her mind immediately connecting the dots that something was terribly wrong. The dog's barking still echoed in the distance, sounding farther away by the minute, though her memory insisted they were close just moments ago. She turned slowly, eyes wide and heart racing, realizing she was alone in the vast darkness of the garden. No sound of paws or footsteps accompanied her. "Oh God, he tricked me," Lauren thought, a cold panic creeping up her spine. "He was never chasing me. He was after her." The realization hit her like a punch, and the mixture of anger and fear made her body react. Without hesitation, she started running back, her feet stumbling through the tall grass that seemed intent on holding her back. Each step was a struggle, and her lungs burned with the effort. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing guilt. How could I be so stupid? I left her alone, she yelled at herself, tears of frustration streaming down her face. He planned it all. He knew I'd try to protect her. Olivia, hang on, I'm coming back. The garden seemed like an entirely different place now, the trees around casting distorted shadows under the distant glow of the mansion's red lights. Lauren pressed forward with no clear direction, guided only by the sounds of struggle coming from the back of the property. The muffled sound of leaves under her feet barely concealed the noises drawing nearer, a mix of Olivia's cries and Theodore's authoritative voice. Please don't do this. My baby, Olivia pleaded, her voice heavy with despair. Quiet. You're mine, you've always been mine, Theodore responded, the coldness of his voice cutting through the darkness like a knife. Lauren saw the silhouettes before she fully approached. Theodore was dragging Olivia by the arm, her body hanging as if she had no strength left to resist. Olivia's head lolled back and forth, clearly unconscious or on the verge of it. Theodore, with his sadistic smile, seemed immune to the faint groans escaping her mouth. Let her go, Lauren shouted, her voice echoing across the garden as she ran towards them. I won't let you hurt anyone else. Theodore paused for a moment, only to glance over his shoulder, his face illuminated by a flash of light coming from the mansion's windows. A cold, calculated smile curved his lips. He continued dragging Olivia like a rag doll, ignoring her feeble protests. Lauren quickened her pace, her body fueled by pure adrenaline. Stop! She's pregnant! She yelled, her words filled with desperation. But Theodore didn't even hesitate, advancing towards the house with steady steps. Each of Olivia's screams and each of Theodore's steps made Lauren's heart beat faster, the desperation growing by the second. Let her go, please, Lauren shouted again, reaching out to grab his arm. She was so close now that she could hear Theodore's labored breathing and the sound of his shoes dragging through the damp earth. I'm going to catch them. Just a little more, she thought, her mind focused on saving Olivia. That's when it happened. The treacherous garden floor, riddled with exposed roots, caught Lauren by surprise. Her foot got caught on a thick root, and her body was flung forward. The fall seemed to last an eternity, her body spinning as her arms tried to find something to grab onto. The impact was brutal. Her head slammed hard against a rock or log she couldn't tell. A sharp pain exploded in her forehead, and black spots began to dance in her vision. No, I can't pass out now, Lauren thought, fighting against the darkness that threatened to engulf her. From her position on the ground, Lauren saw Theodore stop and turn to her, still holding Olivia. His smile was the same she had seen before, full of cruelty and satisfaction. So predictable, he said, shaking his head. Always trying to be the hero. Lauren tried to move, but her body wouldn't obey. The throbbing pain in her head made it impossible to get up, and she could feel something warm trickling down her forehead. Her vision was getting blurrier by the second, and the sounds around her seemed distant as if she were underwater. Olivia, Lauren whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. Tears streamed down her face as she watched Theodore scoop Olivia up as if her weight was nothing. Olivia was completely unconscious now, her arms hanging lifelessly. 2 brides in one night, Theodore said, his grin growing wider. I guess today is my lucky day. Lauren tried to fight the darkness encroaching on her vision, but every second seemed to pull her further away from reality. Theodore began walking towards the mansion, Olivia cradled in his arms like a trophy. Lauren tried to call out to him, to scream or get up, but her body was paralyzed, the pain in her head making any movement impossible. I can't let this happen, she thought, her thoughts growing slower by the minute. I have to do something. But her strength was fading rapidly. Theodore's face seemed distorted by the darkness, transformed into something monstrous under the flickering light escaping from the house's windows. He paused for a moment and looked over his shoulder at Lauren, the sadistic smile still on his lips. Don't worry, dear. You'll soon keep her company, he said, his voice laden with a frightening calmness. His laughter echoed through the garden, the last thing Lauren heard before finally losing consciousness. Lying on the wet grass with liquid dripping from her forehead and the world spinning around her, Lauren struggled desperately to keep her eyes open. Her last sight was of Theodore disappearing into the darkness, taking Olivia with him. The sound of his footsteps mingled with distant barking and the noise of the mansion's alarms, creating a cacophony of terror. "Olivia," Lauren whispered once more, the name escaping her lips like a prayer. Darkness finally won, and Lauren plunged into unconsciousness, her friend's name still stuck in her mind and the sound of Theodore's laughter echoing like an endless nightmare. The garden, once a place of escape, was now a scene of defeat. Silence enveloped Lauren's motionless body, while the gloomy mansion awaited 2 more victims for its collection of lost brides. Lauren woke up with a throbbing pain in her head and a metallic taste in her mouth that made her gag slightly. Her vision was blurry and the surroundings seemed to spin. When she tried to move, she felt something cold and heavy, restraining her wrists and ankles. "What? Where am I?" she muttered, blinking rapidly to clear her eyes. When she finally managed to focus, she realized she was chained to a metal chair, her wrists bound by thick shackles. The place, a kind of basement, was lit by flickering fluorescent lights, making her head hurt even more. "Olivia!" Lauren shouted suddenly, her memory flooded with images of the pregnant woman being taken by Theodore. "Where are you? What did he do to you?" The basement seemed to have come straight out of a nightmare. The stone walls were covered in stains, and the concrete floor had cracks that let out a musty smell. In one corner, an old metal table was cluttered with rusted medical instruments and scalpels that looked like they belonged to another era. In the center of the room, a hospital gurney held Olivia, surrounded by monitors with flashing red numbers and wires connected to her arms. Her face was covered in sweat, and she moaned softly, moving her head from side to side. "She's alive," a feeble voice came from the darkness. Lauren turned her face toward the voice and saw Rebecca, chained to a chair on the other side of the room. The woman looked even paler and thinner than in the dark room where Lauren had found her before. Her hair was disheveled, and her eyes had a glimmer of desperation that made Lauren's heart tighten. "Theodore brought you 2 here a few hours ago," Rebecca explained, her voice trembling. "He set all this up for the baby's delivery. Her water. It seems to have broken." Lauren felt her stomach churn at the words. Olivia began stirring on the gurney, a moan escaping her dry lips. Her hands clutched her belly tightly, even unconscious, as if trying to protect the baby from some invisible threat. Lauren pulled at the chains with all her might, trying to break free. "She's having contractions. We need to help her," she shouted, her voice echoing through the basement. Desperation gripped Lauren as she looked at the table beside Olivia. Medical instruments glistened under the fluorescent light, scalpels, scissors, and tools that looked straight out of a horror movie. Olivia's moan intensified, and her body began to arch with stronger contractions. The machines around her beeped at a frantic pace, lights flashing in alert. "The baby!" Lauren screamed, struggling against the chains with even more force. "She needs a real doctor. We have to do something." But the chains remained firm, and her strength was beginning to wane. Heavy footsteps began to echo down the stairs leading to the basement. Lauren and Rebecca froze, fear taking over their faces. The door creaked open, and Theodore appeared at the top of the stairs, descending slowly. He wore a stained surgical gown and carried a black bag in one hand. "My dear brides," he said, his voice laced with chilling calm. "How nice of you both to be awake for the grand moment." The cold smile on his face made Lauren shudder with rage. She had never felt such hatred for someone in her life. Theodore began arranging his instruments on the table beside Olivia, each movement methodical, as if preparing for a routine delivery. He picked up a large syringe and held it up to the light, inspecting the liquid inside. "You know," he began, his calm voice contrasting with the tension in the air, "I've always wanted a family, but all the women leave me, all of them except dear Rebecca." He walked over to Rebecca and stroked her face. She recoiled in fear but said nothing. "And now I have Olivia, perfect to birth my child," he finished, with a sickly smile. "Why are you doing this?" Lauren shouted, her voice thick with rage and desperation. "Why don't you let her have the baby in a hospital? He's your son." Theodore laughed, a joyless sound that echoed off the walls. "Because she would run away," he replied, his eyes fixed on Lauren. "She would take my son away, like all the others. I can't let that happen." He turned his attention back to Olivia, checking the monitors and making notes. "The labor is progressing well. Soon I will have my son, and none of you will be able to take him from me." Olivia let out a scream of pain, her body shaking violently on the gurney. The machines beeped louder, and the red lights flashed incessantly. Theodore smiled as he watched the contractions grow stronger. He adjusted his surgical gloves calmly, as if about to begin a routine procedure. "It's better this way," he said, looking at Lauren. "She won't feel any pain, and I'll have my son. Everyone wins." Lauren pulled at the chains with all her might, her rage and desperation fueling every move. "You're sick," she screamed, her voice echoing through the basement. Across the room, Rebecca began to sob softly. "You've always been despicable, Theodore," she said, her voice trembling. "That's why they all run away from you." Theodore stopped what he was doing and looked at her, his eyes as cold as ice. "No, dear," he replied. "They run because they don't understand my love. But now I have all of you here and no one will ever abandon me again." Olivia let out another scream of pain, louder than the ones before, her body arching on the gurney. The machines blared furiously, lights flashing at a frantic pace. Theodore picked up a scalpel from the table, holding it carefully. "It's time," he said, his grin widening. "My son is going to be born, and you three will be the family I've always wanted." Lauren pulled at the chains one more time, ignoring the pain that tore at her wrists. "I'm going to stop you, Theodore," she whispered to herself, her eyes fixed on him. But as she struggled, Olivia let out a particularly loud scream, and Theodore took another step toward the gurney. His face was lit with a sickly delight, and the scalpel in his hand gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Let's welcome the newest member of our family," he said, his voice calm but laced with dark intent. Olivia opened her eyes suddenly, her breathing irregular as her whole body arched with a contraction. The pain seemed to cut through every thought, and the scream that came out of her throat echoed through the basement, laden with despair and agony. Her vision was blurred, but the flashes of fluorescent lights above her began to make sense little by little. She looked around trying to understand where she was, and all she saw was a cold environment, surrounded by old machines that kept beeping. When her eyes rested on Theodore standing beside the stretcher, wearing gloves and holding a scalpel, a deep panic took hold. "No! Don't let him do this! Somebody help me!" Olivia shouted, struggling on the stretcher as she tried to pull the tubes and wires attached to her arms. "Olivia, look at me!" Lauren called, her voice laden with urgency, trying to bring her friend back into focus. "Breathe deeply, you can do it. Your baby is being born, you need to calm down." Olivia turned her head towards Lauren's voice, tears already streaming from her eyes. Her rapid breathing and the sweat soaking her forehead and hair made her seem on the verge of collapse. Another contraction came like a merciless wave, ripping out an even louder scream. Her fingers gripped the sides of the stretcher with such force that her knuckles turned white. "I don't want him to be born here. Please take me to the hospital," she pleaded, her voice broken by fear. Theodore, with his usual calm, put the scalpel down on the instrument tray. He walked to the foot of the stretcher and looked intently between Olivia's legs, his calculating eyes assessing the situation. "The baby is already crowning," he informed with a serenity that sounded frightening. "It will be a normal birth. If you cooperate, no one needs to get hurt." He adjusted the tubes attached to Olivia's arms with precision, while she cried in labor pain. Theodore ignored the pleas, busy adjusting the machines around. Lauren, seeing the situation, struggled against the chains that bound her wrists, her frantic movements making the metal cut deeper into the flesh. "She's in pain. Please call a doctor. Think of the baby too," she shouted, trying somehow to break the man's control. But Theodore didn't even turn his face. His eyes were fixed on the monitor, the red numbers blinking as he jotted something down on a paper. Olivia let out another scream that seemed to echo off the stone walls. Her head swayed from side to side, as if she wanted to break free from the pain that consumed her. "It's coming!" she shouted, her body trembling with effort. Her hands moved instinctively to protect her belly, but the straps limited any movement. "I have no more strength," she cried, the sweat dripping down her face. Lauren tried to keep her voice firm, even though her heart was racing with fear. "Strength, Olivia, think of your baby. He needs you now, you can do it." Theodore smiled as he took a towel and wiped Olivia's forehead, but the gesture was laden with coldness. He turned to get another instrument from the table. his hands steady like those of an experienced surgeon. "Everything is progressing well," he commented, his voice almost casual. "One more push and we'll have our son here with us." Lauren felt her stomach churn at the sound of his tone, as if the baby was just a possession, something to be claimed. "You're sick, Theodore. Leave her and the baby alone," she shouted, her voice choked with anger. While Theodore was distracted, Rebecca leaned as far as her chains allowed, moving closer to Lauren. Her face was pale, but her eyes carried a determination that Lauren didn't expect. "Listen," she whispered, almost inaudibly. "Other keys to the chains are in the pocket of his apron. When he's focused on the baby, you have to get them. Behind that old cabinet," she gestured with her gaze, "there's a hidden door. It might be our chance." Lauren nodded, memorizing every detail. "But you're coming too, Rebecca. I won't leave without you," she replied softly. Olivia's contractions grew stronger, one after another, like waves of a restless sea. Each murmur of pain seemed to break Lauren's heart, who could do nothing but encourage her. "You're almost there, Olivia. You've gone through the worst, just a little bit more," she said, trying to hide the terror in her voice. Olivia let out another moan, her face red and swollen from so much effort. "I can't anymore," she sobbed, almost in a whisper. "My baby. Save my baby." Theodore approached again, grabbing another instrument from the table. He seemed pleased with what he saw, as if he were about to complete a job he had been planning for years. "Now," he said, his voice gaining a somber urgency. "Push! The baby is almost here." Olivia, gathering what was left of her strength, pushed with a scream that echoed throughout the basement. Her muscles tensed, and sweat poured down her entire body. Lauren watched with tears in her eyes, pulling the chains with such force that she felt her wrists were raw. "Go, Olivia. You can do it. It's almost over," she encouraged, hoping those words would somehow help. The sound of the beeping machines and Olivia's effort filled the environment, as Theodore leaned closer, ready to receive the baby. With one last scream, Olivia gave it her all. Her body arched on the stretcher, and the silence that followed was unbearable. Theodore slowly stood up, holding something small and purplish in his hands. "It's a boy," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. But something was wrong. The baby was motionless. It wasn't crying. Time seemed to have stopped in the basement. Olivia, fallen on the stretcher, was far too pale, her chest rising and falling with difficulty. Lauren and Rebecca watched in horror, the air trapped in their lungs. Theodore, in turn, seemed lost, his smile fading as he looked at the tiny body in his hands. "Why isn't he crying? He has to cry," he shouted, his tone louder and more desperate. "Do something!" Lauren screamed, struggling even more, the sound of the chains echoing through the basement. Olivia tried to raise her head, tears falling from her eyes as her weak voice pleaded, "My baby. Let me see my baby." But the tiny body remained motionless, its lips blue like night. The tension in the air was unbearable. Theodore, who had always been so controlled, was visibly shaking. He gently rocked the baby, muttering disconnected words as he tried to make it breathe. The silence of the basement was deafening, broken only by the beeps of the machines and Olivia's sobs. Theodore's control was crumbling before everyone, and the horror in his eyes only increased the feeling that nothing else could save them from that nightmare. Theodore held the baby with a frightening care, his eyes fixed on the tiny face, almost as if he were hypnotized. His breathing was heavy, and he seemed to ignore everything around him completely, as if at that moment the world consisted only of the small body in his hands. His firm fingers began to press on the tiny chest with precise movements, trying to resuscitate the child. The silence was oppressive. Every second seemed an eternity. Lauren held her breath as she watched him. Please God, make him cry, she thought, the chains on her wrists now almost forgotten amidst the tension. Finally, a faint sound filled the basement. First a short moan, then a thin and hesitant cry that grew in volume. The sound echoed off the walls, and Theodore let out a deep sigh as if he were emerging from a trance. Tears streamed down his face as he gently rocked the baby in his arms. "That's it, son. Be strong like your father," he said, a cold and satisfied smile forming on his lips. Olivia tried to raise her head from the stretcher, her pale and sweaty face glistening under the fluorescent light. Her hands reached out toward Theodore, her fingers trembling with weakness. "Let me see my son, please," she pleaded, her voice little more than a whisper. But Theodore didn't even look at her. He continued pacing back and forth across the basement, rocking the baby as if it were a prize he had just won. "Daddy will take care of you. No one will separate us," he murmured, his voice cradled by a sweetness that sounded even more frightening. Lauren felt her blood boil with anger. "He's her son. Give him back to his mother," she shouted, her chains jingling as she struggled. But Theodore ignored her completely, as if she and Olivia were mere shadows. Olivia cried softly, growing weaker, and her skin was becoming alarmingly pale. "My baby, let me hold my baby," she repeated, but her voice barely came out. On the other side of the basement, Rebecca watched everything in silence, her expression hardened by hatred and despair. Years trapped in that place had taught her how to move unnoticed. While Theodore was distracted with the baby, her slender fingers slowly worked the lock on Lauren's chain. Every movement was calculated, and her eyes never left Theodore for long. "Don't make noise," she whispered to Lauren, almost inaudible. "Keep talking to him, keep him distracted." Olivia tried to get up again, but her body was too weak. Her hands slipped off the sides of the stretcher, and her head lolled to the side. The machine started to beep more slowly, the numbers on the monitors indicating that her heartbeats were dropping. "Theodore!" Lauren shouted, her voice filled with despair. "She's getting sick! We need to call an ambulance!" But he remained oblivious, absorbed in his own world. His eyes were fixed on the baby, and he was murmuring words that seemed only for him to hear. A soft click echoed through the basement, indicating that Rebecca had finally released one of Lauren's chains. The feeling of freedom was brief, for now Lauren faced an impossible choice. Her mind spun as she looked at Olivia, growing paler on the stretcher, and then at the baby in Theodore's arms, whose breathing still seemed irregular. "The baby needs a hospital," Rebecca whispered, her voice cutting. "But if we don't help Olivia now, she won't survive." Lauren bit her lip until it nearly bled, feeling the unbearable weight of the decision. "How can I choose between a mother and her child?" she thought, her heart racing. Theodore stopped walking and looked at the baby in his arms. The crying had subsided, and the little body seemed to be struggling to breathe again. "I need to take you up there," Theodore said to the baby, his voice softer. "There's a crib waiting for you in your new room." He began to climb the stairs with firm steps, the sound echoing through the basement. The baby let out a weak moan, and Lauren felt her stomach churn. The child's face was turning blue again. Olivia was now completely unconscious, her chest barely moving with shallow breaths. The machines continued to beep, but more and more spaced apart. Rebecca, still by her side, whispered urgently, "He'll be back soon. We have to be quick." Lauren's hands ached as she pulled hard, but the metal wouldn't give. "I can't lose either of them," she thought, nearly in tears. When Lauren realized Theodore wouldn't return, she released the chains, which fell to the ground with a dull thud, the sound echoing through the silent basement like a small miracle. It was Rebecca's cunning in grabbing the key that gave them a chance. Lauren could hardly believe she was finally free. With a racing heart, she whispered to herself like a prayer, "Thank God. Now I'm going to get you out of here." Without wasting any more time, she ran to Rebecca, who waited with her wrists marked by years of captivity. Rebecca's chains were worse than Lauren's. They were old, rusty, and even harder to open. Lauren struggled with the lock, her hands trembling with effort and the urgency that consumed her. Her eyes turned to Olivia on the stretcher. Her friend's breathing was getting weaker and weaker, like a thread about to break. "If we take too long, we'll lose them both," Rebecca said in a hoarse, urgent voice. "The baby won't last much longer without help, and Olivia is too weak." Lauren clenched her teeth, applying all her strength to the chains, while her mind repeated a single phrase, "Hurry, hurry, hurry." Finally, with a dry snap, Rebecca's chains gave way. "Done. Now let's save Olivia," Lauren said, breathless. The two women ran to the stretcher where Olivia lay, motionless and cold as a stone. Her skin was clammy. "Olivia, wake up! We need to get out of here," Lauren called out, patting the woman's face. For a brief moment, Olivia opened her eyes. They were glazed over, full of pain and exhaustion. Her mouth moved, but almost no sound came out. "My baby," she murmured, her voice a wisp of a sigh that broke Lauren's heart. "Calm down," Rebecca replied, holding Olivia's hand tightly. "We'll get him, but first we need to get you out of here. Please hold on." Lifting Olivia seemed like carrying a soaked rag doll. She was completely limp, without the strength to even move a muscle. Lauren and Rebecca held her by the arms, one on each side, practically dragging her towards the stairs. Every step was a struggle. Each labored breath from Olivia seemed like a losing battle. "Hold on, Olivia," Lauren whispered. "I know it hurts, but we need to be quick and quiet." The weight in her arms was unbearable, but giving up was not an option. The stairs seemed endless. Each step required superhuman effort. Olivia could barely move her feet, and her silent sobs were the only response to Lauren's encouragement. Olivia's breathing seemed weaker with every minute. Rebecca, still regaining her strength after years of captivity, could barely hold the weight. "Stop for a bit, I need to catch my breath," she pleaded, her legs trembling. At that moment, a sound pierced the silence like a dagger. It was a faint cry coming from upstairs. The baby was crying, its small, frightened voice echoing through the house. Olivia reacted to the sound. Her head tried to rise, and a glimmer of determination crossed her eyes. "My son. He needs me," she murmured almost soundlessly. Lauren and Rebecca exchanged looks filled with dread. The baby's cry was weaker than before, a sound that seemed to fade away little by little. "We can't go up with her like this," said Rebecca, pointing to Olivia, who already seemed on the verge of complete collapse. "She needs to rest." Lauren looked at the top of the stairs, from where the baby's cry was coming, and then at Olivia, whose life seemed to be draining away with each passing second. She took a deep breath, making a decision that burned in her soul. "I'll get the baby," she declared firmly. "Stay with her here, hidden under the stairs." Without giving time for objections, Lauren helped Rebecca drag Olivia to the dark space under the stairs, where several old, dust-covered boxes offered some shelter. The smell of mold was suffocating, but at that moment it was the only safety they had. "If he comes down, don't make a sound," Lauren instructed, taking off her jacket and covering Olivia, who was shivering with cold. "I'll be as quick as I can. As soon as I get the baby, we'll escape through the back." The baby's cry grew stronger for a moment, then faded again like a flame about to go out. Lauren began to climb the stairs, each step calculated to avoid any noise. The steps creaked under her weight, and her breathing seemed deafening to her own ears. "This crying doesn't sound normal," she thought, feeling her heart tighten. "He needs a doctor urgently." Each step was a mental battle. Her mind repeated the same mantra as she climbed. "I can't make a sound, I can't make a sound." Sweat trickled down her temples, and her fingers, gripping the railing, trembled. The baby's faint cry seemed like a call for help, and with every second that passed, Lauren felt she was racing against time. When she reached the top of the stairs, she saw the bedroom door ajar. A faint light escaped through the crack, illuminating the hallway like a trap. "You and your mother will be safe, my love. I will save you, even if it's the last thing I do," she thought, swallowing her tears as she took careful steps toward the door. It was then that she heard heavy footsteps. Theodore was pacing back and forth, and his voice reached her in low, disturbing tones. "Don't cry, son, Daddy will take care of you. You don't need that woman." The baby's cries grew fainter, almost a murmur. Lauren froze in the middle of the hallway, her heart pounding. Her eyes turned downward where she could see the shadows of Rebecca and Olivia hidden under the stairs. She needed to be quick, but Theodore's voice seemed to be getting closer. "Please, God, help me," she thought, trying to control the fear that threatened to paralyze her. Then silence fell. The baby stopped crying. The sudden sound of firm, determined footsteps filled the hallway, coming toward the stairs. The floor seemed to tremble under Theodore's weight. He was descending toward where Olivia and Rebecca were. Lauren, halfway down the path, was completely exposed. There was no going back, and climbing was impossible. Her eyes fixed on the top of the staircase, where Theodore's shadow slowly emerged. The first step echoed like thunder, followed by another and another. Each step was like a clock counting down the seconds to the end. Lauren, paralyzed, could do nothing but wait for Theodore to find her. Lauren scanned the room for any chance of escape with the baby, until her eyes landed on a heavy curtain. She only had time to run over there at the precise moment when Theodore's firm footsteps reached the top of the stairs. She pressed her back against the wall, trying to control her breathing. Her muscles were tense and sweat trickled down her forehead as she peeked through the thick curtain fabric. Theodore entered the baby's room with determined steps, carrying something in his arms, a wedding dress. He walked over to a chair and carefully, almost reverently draped the dress over it. Lauren held her breath, feeling the tension in the air. The baby was in the crib on the other side of the room, its small cries cutting through the silence. Its breathing was irregular and weak, as if each breath was a struggle. Theodore, however, seemed to ignore the child. He began talking to himself, his voice low and laden with resentment as he arranged the dress on the chair. 3 times. 3 times they left me at the altar. His hand gripped the fabric tightly, fingers trembling with rage. The first said she didn't love me anymore. The second ran off with the best man. He paused, his voice faltering for a moment. Then, with a sudden movement, he punched the wall next to him, the impact echoing through the room. The third. Lauren bit her lip hard to keep from making a sound. Her eyes swept the room, and a spasm of shock went through her body. In the darkest corner of the room, something made Lauren's heart stop. There was an old man tied to a chair wearing a priest's robe. A thick strip of tape covered his mouth, and his wide eyes pleaded for help. He had seen her hide behind the curtains. "What is this?" Lauren thought, horrified. Theodore kept talking, now pacing back and forth across the room, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "But now it's different. I've learned my lesson. If you want someone to stay, you have to make sure they can't leave." He stopped in front of the crib, looking down at the baby with an almost tender yet disturbing expression. "Isn't that right, son? Daddy's learned. That's why I brought your new mummies. They'll never leave us." The priest tried to say something through the tape over his mouth, shaking his head in denial. Theodore turned towards him with a cold smile that made Lauren's hair stand on end. "Ah, Father, how good of you to remind me. We have a wedding to celebrate. With all this wedding rush, I'd nearly forgotten I brought you here." He took a few steps towards the curtain where Lauren was hiding. Before she could react, Theodore violently pulled the fabric aside, revealing her. "My most beautiful bride has arrived. I knew you'd come for the baby. Did you think you could fool me?" Lauren tried to run, but Theodore was faster. His strong hand grabbed her arm. No, none of that running away. You're going to be my wife right now. Olivia's in no condition to get married at the moment." He dragged her to the center of the room and shoved the wedding dress into her arms. "Get dressed. We're doing this properly this time. You looked so beautiful in that dress." The tone in his voice was calm, yet laced with threat. The baby let out a weak moan from the crib, making Lauren's heart clench. "He needs a doctor," she tried to argue, her voice trembling. "The baby's not well," she mumbled. But Theodore completely ignored her, focusing on arranging the candles and flowers for his makeshift ceremony. "Put on the dress," he ordered, this time with an eerie calmness that made Lauren shudder. His hand went to the hilt of a knife tucked into his belt, making his threat clear. With trembling hands, Lauren began to put on the wedding dress over her clothes. The fabric felt heavy, suffocating, as if it carried the weight of all the women Theodore had trapped before her. It was the same dress she had tried on earlier that day, but now it felt like it belonged to another life. Every movement was torture, but she knew she had no choice. Theodore went over to the priest and violently ripped the tape off his mouth. "Start the ceremony, and don't even think about calling for help." The priest coughed, his face a mixture of fear and compassion as he looked at Lauren. "Son, this is madness. You can't force someone to get married," he said, his voice shaking. Theodore pressed the knife against the priest's throat, tilting his head with a chilling smile. "I can and I will. Start it now." The priest closed his eyes for a moment, as if asking for forgiveness, and began reciting the sacred words of marriage. "We are gathered here today." The baby started crying again, such a faint sound it was almost inaudible. Lauren felt her heart clench even tighter as she looked at the tiny body in the crib. It was turning bluer by the second. Theodore, however, held her hand in a crushing grip, squeezing until it hurt. His gaze was fixed on the priest, completely oblivious to his own child's suffering. "Finally," he murmured, "I'm finally going to have a real family." "Madam," called the priest, his voice barely audible, "do you accept Theodore as your lawful husband?" She looked at the crib, where the baby was struggling to breathe, and then at the door, imagining Olivia and Rebecca hiding on the stairs. Theodore squeezed her hand even tighter, like a reminder of the knife at his belt. She needed to buy time, needed a way to distract him and save the baby. The baby's sound grew fainter, almost disappearing, followed by a terrifying silence. Lauren felt a wave of panic engulf her body. She knew she needed to make a decision at that moment. With the firmest voice she could muster, she replied, "Yes, I accept." The smile Theodore gave was the most frightening she had ever seen. "Excellent, excellent," he exclaimed, clapping his hands like a happy child. The priest bowed his head in defeat as Theodore retrieved the rings from his pocket. Lauren kept her eyes fixed on the crib, praying her decision hadn't cost too much time. She needed to keep Theodore focused on her, away from the baby whose breathing was growing weaker. As Theodore slid the ring onto her finger, murmuring words about eternal love and the perfect family, Lauren could only think about how to save that innocent child's life. The cold metal on her finger seemed to burn like ice, a reminder of the sacrifice she was making. "I had to say yes," she thought, swallowing her tears. "It's the only way to keep him away from the baby, even if he locks me in that room." Theodore was completely absorbed in his moment of glory, clutching Lauren's hands tightly as he recited vows of eternal love that he seemed to have memorized long ago. His eyes shone with a disturbing joy, and he wouldn't stop talking about how they would be happy forever. The room, lit by flickering candles, felt more like a macabre altar than a place for a wedding. The cornered priest continued the ceremony with a trembling voice that sounded like it was about to break at any moment. "If anyone has anything against this matrimony—" Theodore turned his head abruptly, shooting a threatening glare at the man. "Skip that part," he said, his voice as cold as his knife's blade. "No one will stop my wedding this time." Lauren could feel his fingers digging into hers as if he was marking his possession. At the same time, her eyes were fixed on the small crib beside them. The baby was there, barely breathing with extreme difficulty. Each second felt like a blow against its tiny life. "I need to get to the crib," Lauren thought desperately, trying to ignore the cold metal of the ring Theodore was about to place on her finger. Slowly, she started moving her feet, adjusting her wedding dress as an excuse to get closer to the baby. "I just need to reveal something," she said, trying to distract him. "You're not this baby's father, and you know it," Lauren lied, shocking everyone, including Theodore, who looked like he was about to faint. "This boy is not your son," she reinforced, making the priest gasp in surprise. It was a lie to distract Theodore, but Lauren needed to keep him distracted to reach the baby. As Theodore tried to recover from the shock, a sudden sound from the stairs cut through the air. It was a soft noise, but enough to make Theodore turn his head towards the door. Seizing the distraction, Lauren took a quick step towards the crib. In an almost instinctive motion, she stretched out her arms and held the baby, feeling the fragile body against her chest. The child was too light, as if already fading away. "No!" yelled Theodore, dropping the rings that clinked on the floor. "Put my son back in the crib now, you liar. This baby is mine, he is my son." Before Theodore could advance, the bedroom door burst open, slamming against the wall. Olivia was there, pale as a ghost, leaning on Rebecca's shoulders. Despite her evident weakness, her eyes shone with a visceral, almost supernatural fury. "My son!" she screamed, stretching out her trembling arms towards the baby. "Give me back my son, you monster!" For a brief moment, Theodore was paralyzed, clearly surprised to see the two women he had left locked in the basement. Theodore's paralysis lasted only a few seconds. He let out a roar of anger like a cornered animal and pulled a gun from his belt. "No one is taking my son!" he bellowed, pointing the gun directly at Olivia and Rebecca. "You won't ruin my family again." The priest, unable to do anything, squeezed his eyes shut and began murmuring a quiet prayer. Lauren held the baby tightly against her chest and, in a desperate impulse, ran towards the door. "Run!" she yelled at Olivia and Rebecca. "He needs a doctor." Olivia tried to take a step forward, but her legs were shaking so much they almost made her fall. Rebecca quickly steadied her, and together they began moving slowly down the hallway. A gunshot echoed through the room, loud and deafening, making them all scream. Theodore had fired into the air, his hand trembling with rage. "Stop now," he ordered, his voice overflowing with hatred. "Come back here with my son." But the women kept heading towards the stairs. However, the priest threw himself with a chair in front of Theodore to give the women a chance to escape. Lauren took advantage of the distraction and mentally thanked him as she led the way with the baby, while Rebecca practically carried Olivia, who could barely keep her eyes open. The hallway was plunged into gloom, illuminated only by the pale moonlight streaming through the dirty windows. Lauren could hear every faint breath of the baby and every dragging footstep of Olivia and Rebecca behind her. Theodore's heavy footsteps echoed in the darkness just behind them, each one bringing the threat of more violence. "You have nowhere to go," he shouted, his voice laced with hatred and desperation. "This house is a fortress. You won't escape." Olivia stumbled again, her legs faltering with the effort. The sound of her fall made Theodore fire again, the blast passing dangerously close to Lauren's head. She felt her heart almost stop with fright, but she kept running. "I won't miss next time," Theodore threatened, his voice eerily calm. The baby's weak cries were a cruel reminder that time was running out. "My son," Olivia called out with difficulty, trying to reach Lauren. "Save him, please." The stairs seemed endless, each step a barrier against freedom. Lauren descended as quickly as she could, her arms aching from holding the baby. Behind her, Rebecca struggled to help Olivia, who seemed to grow weaker with every moment. Theodore kept firing, each bullet ricocheting off the walls and adding to the terror. "I'll kill you all," he roared, his voice echoing through the house. "No one's taking my son from me." The baby trembled in Lauren's arms, his skin growing increasingly cold. She knew he didn't have much time left. "Over here," Rebecca whispered, pulling the others into a side corridor. "There's a back door near the kitchen." Theodore must have heard the movement, because he shifted the direction of his shots. The bullets whizzed through the darkness, one of them passing so close to Olivia that it tore the fabric of her clothes. Olivia let out a muffled scream, clutching her shoulder. "Don't let him get my son," as she pleaded, looking at Lauren with tears in her eyes. They were almost at the back door when Theodore appeared at the end of the hallway. His silhouette was a menacing shadow cut against the moonlight pouring through the windows. He raised the gun slowly, his breath heavy. "Last chance," he said, his voice low and full of venom. "Give me back my son, or none of you will survive." Lauren hugged the baby tighter to her chest and kept running, feeling tears stream down her face. Olivia and Rebecca were right behind, moving as fast as they could. It was then that the last gunshot echoed through the house, louder and more deafening than all the others. The sound tore down the hallway like a death sentence, freezing everyone in place. For an instant, the world was in absolute silence. None of them dared to move, as if the slightest motion could trigger something even worse. Then the sound of a body falling shattered the silence. It was a dull thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of something liquid dripping. The baby started crying harder, as if sensing that something terrible had happened. The sound echoed down the empty hallway, heightening the tension in the air. Someone screamed, a scream that seemed to carry all the despair of that dark night. The fate of the women, the baby, and Theodore was about to be decided. The silence after the gunshot was almost as deafening as the sound of the bullet. The echo of the shot still reverberated through the walls of the mansion when slow, heavy footsteps began descending the stairs. Lauren, Rebecca, and Olivia barely breathed, paralyzed by fear of what might happen next. It was then that, to everyone's relief and surprise, the priest appeared in the hallway. He held an old gun which trembled in his aged hands. "I managed to get free and found this in his room," explained the priest, his voice laden with guilt and relief at the same time. "God forgive me, but sometimes it's necessary to do the right thing." On the floor, Theodore groaned in pain, clutching the leg where he had been hit. His face contorted in rage, and suffering was a shadow of the man who moments ago had coldly issued orders. "You'll pay for this," he snarled at the priest, his voice hoarse. The priest ignored the threats and aimed the gun at him again, keeping the women safe. "It's over, son. Your madness is over. May God have mercy on your soul. But I will not allow you to hurt these women and the baby," he said, his voice gaining firmness. The sound of sirens began cutting through the night, growing ever closer. It was like a promise of salvation for the women who had lived through hell. Lauren held the baby tightly, who was now crying louder, a fragile sound but full of life that brought relief to everyone. Olivia tried to stand up, desperate to see her son, but her legs gave way before she could take a step. "My baby. Let me see my baby," she pleaded, tears streaming down her pale face. Rebecca helped her sit against the wall while murmuring, "Hang in there. It's going to be okay now." Red and blue lights began illuminating the mansion's windows, a display of colors that announced the arrival of police and paramedics. Theodore, still trying to crawl away. But before he could get anywhere, The priest steadied the gun again. "Don't move." His voice echoed with an unexpected authority, which silenced even Theodore's last words of hatred. "You've hurt enough people for a lifetime. I'm a man of God and I won't kill you, but I won't let you go unpunished either. None of us can escape the justice of men or God." The police stormed the house with guns drawn, accompanied by paramedics carrying emergency equipment. The baby was the priority, quickly placed in a portable incubator with oxygen. "He's showing unstable signs," explained one of the doctors as he adjusted the breathing tubes. "But if we act fast, he'll recover." Olivia watched it all with wide eyes, trying to understand if her son was really out of danger. "Please tell me he's going to be okay," she begged between sobs. "He's strong like you," Lauren replied, tenderly holding her friend's hand. The paramedics quickly turned to Olivia, who was on the verge of collapse. She was weak and pale, but still she fought against the medics, insisting she didn't want to go to the hospital without knowing about her son. "You need to take care of him first," she screamed, as the paramedics tried to stabilize her with IV fluids and transfusions. "He's already on his way," one of them assured her, while others applied quick dressings to her wounds. "Now we need to take care of you. Your son needs you alive." Rebecca, who finally had a moment to breathe, sank down against the wall. Her legs could barely support her, and the years trapped in the house seemed to weigh on her body. A medic knelt beside her to examine her injuries, but what she wanted was just to confirm what seemed impossible. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice an incredulous whisper. "Are we really free?" The medic held her hand firmly and gave her an empathetic smile. "Yes, ma'am, it's over. You're safe now." Lauren, still dressed in her wedding gown, watched it all as if in a dream. The sounds around her seemed muffled, and the sight of Theodore being handcuffed and led to the police car was almost surreal. A kind officer approached her, covering her with a blanket. "You need to be examined too," he said gently. But she barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on the man who had caused so much suffering, now defeated and being escorted out. "He'll never hurt anyone again," assured the investigator, carrying plastic bags full of evidence. "The evidence is irrefutable." Theodore's safe was opened during the search, revealing documents and photos of the women he had made disappear. Each image was a grim reminder of his obsession, and each trophy found was evidence against him. "He's going to spend the rest of his life in jail," said another officer. "This time, justice will prevail." At the hospital, a few hours later, Olivia finally held her son in her arms. The color had returned to the baby's face, who was now sleeping peacefully after treatment. Olivia couldn't hold back her tears of joy as she watched him. "He's so strong," she said to the doctor, her voice choked with emotion. "Stronger than I could ever imagine." The doctor smiled. "A few more days of observation and you'll be ready to start a new life together." Meanwhile, Rebecca was experiencing what seemed like a miracle. Her family, who had long since lost hope of finding her alive, was gathered around her bed. The family had believed she had gone out of the country, just as Theodore had convincingly said, implying they were living a dream. Lauren, despite needing stitches in her head, insisted on visiting Olivia and the baby whenever she could. "You're my family now," she would say, holding Olivia's hand. "We went through this together, and we'll heal together." The friendship of the three women, forged in suffering, became an unbreakable bond. Olivia decided to name the baby Jack, which means gift from God. He became the symbol that even in the darkest circumstances, there was hope. "We are survivors," said Rebecca, holding her friend's hands, "and now we are free." 1 week later, the hospital corridor was unrecognizable. Where there had once been tension and fear, now reigned smiles and quiet joy. Olivia sat up straight in the bed, as if wanting to show her newly discovered strength. She cradled Jack in her arms as he slept peacefully, his gentle breathing bringing an almost magical comfort. The baby's skin was a healthy pink, and the tiny movements of his hands suggested he was dreaming. "I never thought leaving the hospital would feel like such a big victory," Olivia commented, her eyes shining as she kissed her son's forehead. "Every day here felt like a whole year." Lauren entered the room holding a small suitcase with Olivia and the baby's clothes. The dress she wore was simple, but didn't hide the serenity she seemed to have finally found. Right behind her, Rebecca appeared with a bouquet of yellow flowers, her smile carrying a genuine joy. That simple gesture seemed to erase years of suffering and sadness. Ready to go home? Lauren asked, placing the suitcase next to the bed. Olivia looked at her friends, her eyes brimming with emotion. It's strange, I don't have a home anymore, she confessed, her voice almost a whisper. Of course you do, Rebecca replied, her voice laden with conviction. She placed the bouquet next to the bed and leaned over to hold Olivia's hand. My family has already decided. You two are staying with us. The house is huge. There's room for everyone. And besides, she added with a soft laugh, someone's going to need to help me readjust. A lot has changed in 5 years. Her eyes, filled with gratitude, seemed to reflect the relief of finally being free. The doctor entered the room, bringing the final evaluation. He carefully examined Jack, listening to the baby's heart and lungs. Remarkable, he said, tickling the little one's belly, who responded with a yawn. After everything he's been through, he's healthier than many babies born under ideal conditions. Olivia smiled, holding her son closer. He's a warrior, she replied, her voice filled with pride. Just like his family. A nurse arrived with a wheelchair, following hospital protocol, but Olivia raised her hand. Thank you, but I won't be using that. I've spent too much time relying on others, she stated, as she slowly stood up. Although her legs were still weak, Olivia showed a determination that surprised even Lauren and Rebecca. Now it's time to walk on my own 2 feet. Lauren and Rebecca stood by her side, ready to support her if needed, but Olivia was steady. Each step was an achievement, a symbol of her newly discovered strength. The hospital corridor seemed brighter that morning, illuminated by a soft light coming in from the windows. It was as if the sun itself was celebrating the moment. Patients and staff looked at the small group, some even applauding discreetly. The mansion survivors, as the press called them, now represented a symbol of hope for many. Lauren, walking beside Olivia, murmured, I never thought being called a survivor could sound so good. At the exit, a surprise awaited them. Rebecca's mother's car was decorated with blue balloons and a banner that read, Welcome, Jack. Olivia stopped, her eyes filled with tears. You didn't have to do this, she said, her voice choked. But Rebecca cut her off with a tight hug. Of course we did. It's the first time my nephew is going home. He deserves all the celebration in the world. Lauren took care of securing Jack in the brand new car seat, carefully strapped into the back seat. The baby looked around curiously, making little sounds that brought smiles to everyone's faces. He knows he's going somewhere safe, Lauren commented, adjusting the blanket around the little one. He'll never have to be afraid again. The trip to Rebecca's house was peaceful. Jack slept almost the entire time, and Olivia couldn't take her eyes off him. Each little breath from the baby seemed to reinforce that they were finally safe. When they arrived at the house, Olivia couldn't contain a sigh of relief. It was exactly as Rebecca had described, big, cozy, and full of life. The room prepared for Olivia and Jack had light blue painted walls and a new crib, decorated with star drawings. Olivia observed the place with tears of happiness streaming down. It's more than I could ever imagine. After Jack was placed in the crib for an afternoon nap, the 3 women sat on the porch, enjoying the soft breeze. It was a rare moment of peace, something they all needed. Who would have thought that amidst the chaos I would find such loyal and strong women? I don't know how to thank each one of you, she said. The afternoon brought more news. Theodore's trial had come to an end, and he had been sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Rebecca was the first to react. It's really over, she said, taking a deep breath, as if releasing the last hint of tension. We can move forward now. Olivia held her friend's hands, her gaze firm. Jack's soft cry caught their attention, and Olivia went to get him in the room. When she returned, she held the little one in her arms, who looked around with big, curious eyes. Lauren tickled his foot, eliciting a smile. My son. He will only know love, and that's the best thing a mother's heart can dream of. While the sun was setting, the 3 strong women, now an unlikely family, watched the golden light fill the sky. Jack played with a lock of Olivia's hair. You will always be protected, Jack. The 3 of us are strong and we will always take care of you, Rebecca whispered, eliciting laughter from her friends, but this time they knew it was true. Months later, the morning sun streamed through the large windows of the house, flooding the kitchen with a warm, welcoming light. Jack, now 6 months old, was having a ball in his high chair. Patting his chubby little hands on the table, as Olivia tried to feed him some baby food. His big eyes sparkled with amusement, and with each attempt from his mother, he turned his face away with a stubborn giggle. "Come on, son, just one more spoonful," Olivia insisted, unable to contain her laughter. "Aunt Lauren made this baby food especially for you, and you're going to love it." On the other side of the kitchen, Lauren was focused at the stove, carefully stirring a pot of porridge. The aroma of freshly baked homemade bread wafted through the room, mingling with the scent of freshly brewed coffee. "That boy already knows what's good," she commented, casting an amused look at Jack as she took a batch of rolls out of the oven. "He wants the bread, not the baby food, just like his mother, isn't that right, Olivia?" Olivia rolled her eyes but smiled as she wiped the baby's messy face. "You're spoiling him, Lauren. This boy is going to be spoiled rotten. He needs to eat age-appropriate food," she teased, reaching for a piece of bread. Jack stretched his arms towards the roll, making excited noises, which made the two women burst out laughing as the mother fed him another spoonful of his baby food. Rebecca entered the kitchen at that moment, carrying a stack of papers and notebooks. Her hair, now cut in a modern style that accentuated her features, was tied in a casual bun. "This house looks like a breakfast diner," she said, placing the papers on the table and scooping Jack into her arms. He immediately grabbed a lock of her hair, laughing as he tugged on it. "Hey, buddy, this hair isn't your toy." She leaned down to kiss the baby's forehead before wiping him clean with a cloth. "You're studying too much," Lauren said, setting a plate of rolls on the table. "Take a break and eat before Jack takes you down." Rebecca smiled as she grabbed a warm roll. "It's for a good cause. I want to help other people rebuild their lives like we did. That's why I need to study." The morning routine in that house was something the three women had never imagined they would achieve. After breakfast, Olivia would take Jack out to the garden, where he would be fascinated by the butterflies flitting from flower to flower. Rebecca would study on the porch, keeping an eye on the duo as she reviewed her notes. Lauren, ever the busy bee, would tend to the household chores and the garden, now bursting with colorful blooms she had planted herself. The sound of laughter and quiet conversation filled the air. Rebecca's family would often come by, bringing more joy to that already lively home. Rebecca's mother, especially, had an immense affection for Jack. Whenever she visited, she would bring a dish of homemade food or a new gift for the baby. "He's the light of this house," she would say, holding Jack in her lap and showering him with kisses. "God has given us a gift by placing him in our lives." Even in challenging times, they never faced those challenges alone. There was always a hand extended, a word of comfort, a shared cup of tea on the porch. Jack seemed to be the cure for all those moments, his innocent smile serving as a reminder that everything would be all right. Olivia, who had never imagined herself as an artist, now spent much of her time creating mobiles and educational toys. Her pieces soon became popular in the neighborhood, and she started thinking about opening a small shop. "Maybe next year," she would say, as Jack played with one of the mobiles she had made especially for him. "When he's older and I have more time." Rebecca, on the other hand, immersed herself in her studies with a passion that seemed unshakable. Whenever she needed a break, she would run off to play with Jack or help Olivia with her creations. "It's like I'm rediscovering the world," she confessed once, sitting on the porch with her books beside her. "After being trapped for so long, it's good to feel like I can make a difference." In the evenings, after putting Jack to bed, the three women would gather on the porch. It was everyone's favorite moment. They would drink tea, talk about the future, and laugh at the day's funny occurrences. "Did you see Jack's face when he tasted the baby food?" Lauren would ask, laughing. "He made that expression like it was the most horrible thing in the world." Olivia and Rebecca would laugh along, the sound of the wind in the surrounding trees bringing a peace that had seemed impossible months ago. Jack's room was the heart of the house. With light blue walls and a crib adorned with animal drawings, it was a space filled with love. A musical mobile crafted by Olivia played lullabies that helped the baby fall asleep every night. Olivia would spend hours there, sitting beside the crib, watching her son sleep. "He's my miracle," she would say, her voice soft. "The reason I keep fighting every single day." Lauren also found her own way to contribute. She became the house's photographer, capturing every special moment. The walls were covered with photos: Jack's first smile, Olivia proudly holding him, Rebecca helping him crawl in the garden. Each image was proof that despite everything, They had found a way to be happy. The months went by and the baby grew, bringing new joys every day. Jack started crawling and soon tried to take his first steps, provoking laughter with his clumsy falls. "He's going to run before we think," Rebecca joked, as she held the little one by the hands. "And we'll need stamina to keep up with him." The seasons changed, but inside that house love was constant. The family planned the future with enthusiasm. They dreamed of going on trips, maybe taking Jack to see the beach. Olivia wanted to expand her craft store. Rebecca thought about how to use her future degree to help other women, and Lauren saw herself taking care of a small cafe where she could cook and sell her recipes. But the most important thing had already been achieved. They were a family, united by love, overcoming, and the certainty that together they could face anything. The house was a haven, and with each new day, life seemed brighter. The future opened before them like a sunny road. No matter what destiny had in store, they knew they could face anything side by side. "We've been through the worst," Olivia said one night as she held Jack. "Now it's just looking ahead." The small garden was decorated with white and pink flowers. Delicate lights hung between the trees, and the scent of jasmine lingered in the air. Jack, now 2.5 years old, walked proudly down the makeshift aisle between the chairs, carrying the rings on a blue cushion. "Slowly, son," Olivia laughed, adjusting the boy's little suit. "Let Aunt Lauren go in first." In the room that had been turned into the bridal suite, Lauren looked at her reflection in the mirror as Rebecca adjusted her veil. The dress was simple and elegant, lovingly chosen on happy afternoons with her friends, between laughter and tears of joy. "I never thought I'd see you so nervous," Rebecca joked, fixing the wreath. "You, always so calm." Raphael waited at the improvised altar in the garden, his smile lighting up the whole place. The pediatrician had entered their lives when Jack had to go to the hospital with a high fever. The caring way he treated the boy, his calm manner of explaining everything to a distraught Olivia, and how he respected the protective presence of Lauren and Rebecca during the appointment, showed that there was something special there. During Jack's follow-up appointments, Raphael and Lauren naturally grew closer. He invited her for coffee after work, then for dinner, and soon he was joining their Sunday lunches at their house. His kindness and patience won over not only Lauren, but the entire makeshift family they had built. Jack wouldn't stay still, running between the guests with his little cushion. "Uncle Rafa," he shouted every time he passed the groom, who laughed and waved. The boy had been his first advocate. In Olivia's words, if Jack liked him, he was a good person. And Jack not only liked, but adored his Dr. Uncle, as he called him at first. The music began to play, and Rebecca and Olivia entered first as bridesmaids, their light pink dresses matching the garden flowers. Jack came right after, surprising everyone by walking well-behaved as a perfect page boy, his tongue between his teeth, showing his concentration. "Just like we rehearsed," he whispered to himself. When Lauren appeared at the door, there was a collective sigh. Her smile lit up the whole garden, and her eyes shone with happiness. Raphael couldn't hold back the tears as he saw his bride approaching. "She looks like a princess," Jack said to his mother, who picked him up to see better. "It's because she's happy, my love," Olivia replied, kissing her son's cheek. The ceremony was simple and moving. Raphael spoke about how destiny sometimes uses unexpected paths to bring people together, and how a child's fever had led to the greatest love of his life. Lauren, who had always struggled to express her feelings, surprised everyone with words that came straight from the heart. "You showed me that love can be calm and secure, that it can heal and transform." During the party, Olivia and Rebecca gave a speech that moved everyone. They spoke about how Lauren had been strong for them, how her love had helped create a home where there was once only fear. "Oh, you deserve all the happiness in the world," Rebecca said, raising her glass. "And Raphael, welcome officially to the most unlikely and most united family that exists." Jack stole the show during the newlyweds' first dance, insisting on dancing along. Raphael picked him up, and the three twirled around the garden, laughing and having fun. It was the perfect image of what that family represented. Unconditional love and hearts big enough to always make room for one more. The makeshift dance floor in the garden was never empty for a minute. Raphael's colleagues from the hospital mingled with Rebecca's family, the neighbors who had become friends, and the people who, in one way or another, had been part of their journey until then. It was a celebration not only of love, but of life and the ability to start over. The bouquet toss moment was special. Lauren had planned everything with Jack. When she pretended to throw to one side, the boy ran and handed the bouquet straight to Rebecca, who blushed when she saw the phone number of Raphael's handsome resident written on one of the flowers, which even had a brother who was enchanted with Olivia and her son. Later, as the party was winding down, Olivia found Jack asleep in Raphael's lap as he and Lauren danced slowly to one last song. It was a scene that perfectly summed up what they had become, a family built on love, respect, and the certainty that life's best gifts come in unexpected moments and forms. When the newlyweds left for their honeymoon, they left behind a garden full of flowers, laughter, and happy memories. Olivia and Rebecca hugged their friend tightly, knowing it wasn't goodbye, but the beginning of a new chapter in their story. Sleepy Jack gave his aunt and new uncle one last hug, whispering, "Come back soon to play with us." And so, under a starry sky and with hearts full of joy, that different family celebrated not only a marriage, but the victory of love over everything else. It was proof that happiness can take many forms, and that happy endings are even more beautiful when shared with those we choose to have by our side. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to continue bringing exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that's about to appear on your screen. We are immensely grateful to have you here with us. Now you can click on the links that are appearing on the screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, full of valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.